Hello and welcome to Media MD, the podcast where each fortnight we take a look at a piece of media that we have somehow missed. I am Reuben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And this fortnight we actually have a special guest with us, Nicholas Kory. Hi.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
No worries. So what have you got to bring to us this fortnight, Nick?
So I actually am bringing a science fiction movie that is near and dear to my heart. It goes by the name of Attack the Block. And it's a bit of a cult classic. Not many people have actually seen it from what I understand. And this is totally new to you guys, correct?
Never even heard of it.
I used to work at a video store, and I think I remember seeing an ad for it a long time ago, but I can't... I'm really having trouble piecing together what it actually is.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's actually more than I even knew about it going into it. This was a movie that I had literally just seen screenshots of online, and I'm like, what the heck is this movie? This looks amazing. And it shows like a kid running down a hallway with a katana and he's being chased by aliens. I'm like, that looks awesome. So I just looked it up and ordered it on... Awesome. Yeah, I just ordered it on Amazon and just watched it totally cold and just fell in love with it. So if you've seen an ad for it, like I said, that's a step ahead of where I was when I first got into it.
I think the ad... Tell me if this is right or not. I think the ad I saw for it was like... a bunch of like London chav kind of people fighting with aliens. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of the movie. The tagline is inner city versus outer space, and then a lot of the ad campaign kind of compares it to mixing Gremlins with Goonies. And that's kind of
Sold.
The vibe you get from it, but it's rated R, so there's a lot more swearing and violence in it too. But yeah, it's a really good sci-fi action comedy movie.
Okay, cool. So, what do you think? So, from what you're describing, the style of comedy sounds kind of like what's that? What's the Simon Pegg movie? The World's End. Is that the one I'm thinking?
Yes. Yep. This was actually produced by two of the companies that also produced The World's End, Shaun of the Dead, and Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
The three big Simon Pegg, Nick Frost films. So yeah, very much in that wheelhouse.
Okay, cool. So, what do you think are its... Why is it a cult classic? Why is it something that you immediately fell in love with?
I fell in love with it because it takes two of my favorite things, which one of them being kind of that kids on bikes genre of storytelling, kind of like that Stand By Me or Goonies style of film, where there's really a charm about that sort of era of storytelling that you don't see a whole lot in major Hollywood films now. And then it combines that with, I wouldn't call it hardcore violence, but they don't pull any punches. Like it's, they're not afraid to show blood and they're not afraid to have violence on screen. And then I'm a creature guy. I love my monsters, and the aliens in this film, like they're pretty cool. They stand out.
So is it like, you say they don't hold any punches with the violence, and you describe it as that kind of like Stephen King style or like Stranger Things style. Is it children fighting against these aliens?
Yeah, it's people of various ages. I think the youngest kids on here are probably around 8 or 9, and they're not in it for a whole lot. They just have a couple scenes here and there, But the main character looks like he's probably like 14 or 15. And you guys will probably recognize him. The actor is John Boyega, who plays Finn in the most recent Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this was his entry into science fiction that landed him a Star Wars role.
I think if this wasn't his first movie, I think it was definitely one of his first that actually had a decent budget behind it. So
yeah.
So you said, this is just more out of my own curiosity than out of any specific need to understand this, but you said that the youngest was like 8 or 9 and they were varying ages. How old do they get? Is there like grandmas fighting aliens in this movie?
Not quite. The lead protagonist, like I said, John Boyega, he's supposed to be about 14 or 15 in this. There is a woman who's a nurse. She's probably in and around the age of 30, I would guess. And then, Nick Frost is in it as well. So he has not a huge character, but he has a role in it too. So there are adults, but the story focuses on this group, this kind of gang of kids that are kind of the troublemakers of their apartment block and how they deal with these alien creatures that are suddenly invading their lives.
And I guess that kind of would be useful to give it a more of a like whimsical kind of sense, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it adds a layer of personality that, again, even though I love big budget action films, a lot of those are, at least recently, they're kind of lacking that person. Oh, of course, now with the superhero films, we have more charm and humor in them. But before that, it was pretty much just, guy with a shaved head toting guns, and that's fun, but, it's nice to have some color there, too.
Yeah.
Maybe I just have this weird kind of disconnect in my brain, because when I saw this, I think I saw this trailer for this movie like when it came out to DVD 5 or 6 years ago or whatever, and it seemed very... I would have described it, if I had to guess what the movie was about without having seen it, I would have described it as like the In-Betweeners meets like an alien invasion kind of thing, but it sounds like it's more like whimsical and fantastical.
Well, it is rated R. I mean, it is an adult film, so I guess you're kind of on the right point when you're talking about the In-Betweeners there. However, it's not as focused on comedy, but comedy is a very real part of it, if that makes sense. Like it is first and foremost a science fiction suspense movie, but the mere fact that it focuses on these kids injects this level of humor that wouldn't normally be there.
Okay, so can you tell me a bit about the aliens that are invading?
Yeah, definitely. They're total monsters. Like they're not a sentient race. They're not like scouting out Earth for a colony or anything like that. They're totally just creatures, like almost like the alien from, the Alien films from the Ridley Scott horror movie in the 70s. They're covered in this like black fur. They're about gorilla sized, and they're territorial monsters is all it comes down to, that just happen across Earth. So the plot, when it comes to that part of the plot, there's not a whole lot going on there. But they're interesting enough of a creature, and especially when you look at the fact that a lot of the effects in this movie were practical effects that they then just went over with kind of a CG brush to give it a little extra layer of realism. But a lot of these monsters on there are guys in suits and are animatronics, and that, to me, it's cool to see that still in this day and age in filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to do effects has always been a nice blend of practical and CGI effects.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with monster movies, I guess, because once you get into fully CGI, like monster films, it gets so disconnected from reality in a very weird way that just makes it not have no stakes at all.
It's tough for like the actors and stuff as well, because they're probably acting in front of like a sock puppet or something, and hard to do.
Yeah. So again, this is just very speculative, but I'm imagining now in my head, it's like this is gonna sound so stupid. And actually, now that I'm about to say this is a movie that I really want to see, like Home Alone versus an alien, right? Where it's like defending an apartment block with these weird, intricate, MacGyvered together traps against these extraterrestrial beings. I don't know if that's what it's like, but that's what I want to see now that idea's in my head.
Well, I hope I'm not setting this up, but they're not really so much on the trap stuff. But it is again, Goonies meets Gremlins, but rated R, I think, is the perfect way to describe this movie, because it has the feelings of both, but it also has the language and the themes of a more adult action film. You compared it earlier to The World's End, and I would say that is a very appropriate comparison. And you can definitely see that the connective tissue, or kind of that narrative through line between this movie and movies like The World's End or Shaun of the Dead or that sort of thing.
I don't know exactly what put this in my head, but I'm imagining some sort of Misfits similarities as well.
Misfits, yes.
I guess that's sort of, the fact that they're not necessarily the best behaved kids, but they're getting put in this situation that calls them to sort of step up. I'm excited.
Although in Misfits, I wouldn't say they really do ever step up. But
they do.
How we go with the
they do every now and then.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to jump into it. We'll meet back in 2 weeks and talk about what we thought of it.
Great.
All right. Cool. Well, I'll pass us off to our future versions right now. Thanks, past me. Yes. So I'm future Reuben, and I'm here to tell you that what you're about to listen to will contain spoilers for Attack the Block. So don't keep listening to this episode of Media MD until you have watched Attack the Block. it's a pretty good movie. Spoilers for the second half of this episode, but it's fun. It's good fun. So go check it out. We'll be waiting right here, and we will we'll keep going when you get back, I guess. All right, see you in a bit. And we are back 2 weeks later. So, Attack the Block. I have a lot of things to say about this one. I want to spoil it right away by just saying I really like this movie. I thought this was a really fun movie.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And usually when people say a movie was fun, that kind of has this like connotation of like, oh, it's fun. Like it's a bit shallow, But I didn't really.
Yeah, like they don't want to say it's good.
Yeah, they don't want to say like, oh, it really made me think. And like, okay, this movie probably doesn't have that many social commentaries. It has a bit of, stuff that makes you think in there.
But it sort of half attempts to dabble in that sort of stuff, but doesn't really put the effort in. It just sort of skips around it, I would have said.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And not to its detriment either. I would say it's fun in the sense that it's like, it's a movie that makes you feel good and it's not like shallow. Yeah. It's just like engaging and fun, like, I don't know. Anyway, we usually start off with a plot description, but I feel like this movie is very simple, very straightforward. Yeah. So I don't know if we even need one.
Yeah. Aliens attack the block. Like that's more or less
aliens attack and this gang of young teen chavs fight them off, basically.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, this movie is definitely very straightforward, but I don't know. It's hard to say that without also not conveying disappointment, because I wasn't disappointed in this movie. Like, it was a really fun movie. It was straightforward and fun, and everything just kind of went. Everything was really good. I think
it was one of those movies that sort of set out to do a particular thing and accomplished it really well. Like, it wasn't reaching too far. Like, they just set out to make a relatively simple but still quality sort of, alien invasion movie, and that's sort of what they pulled off.
Right, that's what I was just gonna offer, was that it's a film that it doesn't do more than it should, or it doesn't try to do more than it should.
Yeah, exactly.
And what you said is right. They set out to do a fun science fiction action movie, and that's ultimately what it is. It's not making any greater commentary about anything. It's just presenting us with a basic premise and the action to follow that up, and that's what it delivers on.
Yeah, and I'd say it really delivers in a lot of ways. Like, technically, this movie was made by people who are clearly very competent and good at their jobs.
Yeah.
Like, this is a weird thing to say, but usually when I'm watching a movie or a TV show or whatever, establishing shots are never something that I really think about as that's good or that's bad. But a lot of the shots the establishing shots in this movie are just like these shots from the base of the apartment block looking up at the apartment block, and it gives you this really weird sense of scale that's like really cool for watching this movie, and it establishes it really well in a way that actually made me think about establishing shots where I normally wouldn't in watching anything else.
Yeah, great sense of place, I think, with this film. Even though it is a relatively small setting, they really do a good job to establish a prevailing feeling of that setting. You get a great idea of where you are in relation to the block pretty much throughout the whole film.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I remember when I was watching it, one of the first shots of the block is when the gang is like riding their bikes back into it or whatever, and the camera just lingers for like a few seconds on a map that's posted right down the bottom that just kind of has, this is the block and here's this outline, and then it points out a couple of key places, and it just lingers for like 2 or 3 seconds. Not enough time to really kind of like wrap your head around it fully, but it's like, oh, now I know exactly what the spacing of this movie is going to be for the rest of it. I just thought that was really interesting, and kind of, it's not even center frame, it's just kind of off to the side a little bit, but you can immediately kind of be drawn to it and know exactly what's going to be happening, and like the spacing for what's going to happen for the rest of the movie, which I thought was really clever. When I watched this movie just last night, so I would be fresh for recording. And before I was going to watch it, and then my parents were around, and I was like, oh, do you guys want to watch this movie with me? And they kept asking me to pitch it to them. And I didn't want to, because I knew that this would be the kind of movie that normally, if I described it, they wouldn't enjoy, right? And this led me to talking to looking up like the review scores for the movie to see how other people had appreciated it, just so I could be like, oh, check it out, it's got this on IMDb or whatever. And I found that there was this weird discrepancy between the IMDb scores and the Rotten Tomatoes scores. Like,
Really?
it had a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is like, 90% of critics liked it. That's pretty good. But on IMDb, its user score is like 6 out of 10 or something ridiculously low.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
and I was like,
aware of that.
yeah, and I have no, after, that was before I watched it, and so it made me a bit apprehensive, but of course, as soon as I started watching the movie, it was really good. Like, I don't know why people, I don't know.
I wonder if there was like
weird to me.
a bad advertising campaign and a lot of people went in expecting something different to what they got, because like that's what's hurt cult sort of films on places like IMDb in the past. So it could just be something like
well,
that.
I would say I can speak a little bit to this film's opening weekend, just a little bit. I know that when it released in the UK, which was, obviously where it was filmed and everything, it released the same weekend as, I think, Fast and the Furious 5 and the original Thor movie. So it had two other big films to go up against, both of which, were taking place in established universes and with characters that people knew. And this is literally... it's its own story. There's no other, there's no comic book that you're missing. There's no, novelization that it follows or anything like that. So it was kind of, it had its work cut out for it, even on its domestic release. And then when it finally came to the United States, when it came to the West, it had a limited release. And I think it only showed in a total of like 60 theaters across the entire US. So that would be why I myself hadn't heard of it until well after it had come out. And that's kind of a big part of why I can't speak to the IMDb score, but I can say that its release and its opening weekend, generally the biggest weekend for a film, it had a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I looked up the budget and how much this movie made, and it made about half of its $13 million budget, which isn't even that high for this kind of... It's not a high budget movie. I mean, it looks good, but it's not super expensive. But it really didn't make a lot of money. And when I was looking it up, it kind of... One of the theories that was put forward by people was because this movie is so British, like it tells this story about these 5 very, very British kids in this very, very British setting that is maybe a bit disconnected for American audiences. But I don't know. It seems like this movie did so much worse than it should have. Like,
right?
This
Yeah,
is a really
and that's
fun movie.
right. And I saw that studios use that as an excuse as to why they wouldn't want to pick up the film and distribute it in the U.S. was because of how thick the accents are and how fast everybody talks, and some people, and again, this is all from Wikipedia, so I can't speak to the validity of this information, but it said that some studios thought that maybe doing subtitles would be a good idea, even though everyone's speaking English in it, but which struck me as weird. But when you sit down and watch the movie, I don't think it was too hard to follow what was going on as someone from the U.S. watching, a very thickly British film. So
or just like use context. Like even if you they use a lot of slang, and it's like, okay, I don't understand what that word means, but like use context clues.
Yeah,
people.
exactly.
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this movie was only from 2011. It's not like it was 2 decades ago or something, and that seems like a bit of an outdated excuse for not pushing it, or I don't know, maybe the marketing campaign just wasn't there or something. We got a bit off track about talking about the movie. I have a couple more things I want to touch on with it. So I talked about how the establishing shots were good, and it's got like really good cinematography. It's got a lot of really good, just a really good like engaging shots. The finale of the movie has Moses, the main character, like running past all these aliens, and it does this beautiful slow motion shot of him like jumping over them with like this little alien in a backpack on his bag, and its limbs are like flailing around. It's got these really like good, clever, cool shots to watch. It just was a very competently made movie. Although the one technical aspect where I think there was a bit of weirdness going on was with the soundtrack for the movie.
Really?
Well, it was good at parts, I felt, but it was very eclectic. It had this kind of it had like, there were tracks that were like, hip hop tracks when they're doing their gearing up montage, or like these kind of future synthy tracks, which is very like, I guess the comparison would be like Stranger Things, where they're kind of riding around on their bikes, that kind of thing. But then it also had very, I don't know how to describe it. It felt very Men in Black kind of soundtrack, where it's like the generic kind of superhero action movie soundtrack.
Sure.
Where it's like, you know, that kind of swelling music that's just kind of a bit orchestral and is meant to hint that like, oh, things are happening now, you know, which is, I always feel like that kind of stuff is a bit overdone nowadays with that whole kind of action genre. Yeah, it had a real mix of different things in there, which was a bit strange, but I don't know. There was some really good parts where the music was like, oh, this is really emphasizing how like street this scene is, kind of. I don't know if that's the right word, like kind of street. And then it had like this then it jumped to these weird kind of superhero movie scores where it was like, it felt like the camera should be swooping around following these aliens like flying down, and it was a bit weird. I don't know. I have a couple of different things to say about it, but really it's just kind of nitpicking small bad things or nitpicking small good things that just kind of contributed to this movie being enjoyable from start to finish. Yeah, I
thought the effects were really good. Like I think you talked a bit previously, Nick, about how they sort of blended CGI with practical effects. And I thought that really showed through. I think the only part I thought where the effects were bad was sort of right at the start when that first alien lands on the car, and it was a bit Doctor Who-y, I'd say. I feel kind of racist constantly comparing this to other British things, but yeah, the effects were a little bit Doctor Who-y, but then the later ones, the sort of the black ones with the glow in the dark teeth, which was just a random but nice touch, the glow in the dark teeth. Yeah, like it was really well done. And all the blood and stuff was good.
I feel like this movie did have a smaller budget, and there were things like the decision to have the kind of black shadowy monsters as the aliens kind of makes sense in the context of trying to save budget, but they really pulled it off in a good way. Although there were a couple of cases where they do like, or at the very start, I know what you mean, Elliot, where the effects felt like they were a bit clunky at the start. Like there's the scene where they're chasing the first alien, the female alien, they chase it into like the shed.
It was very similar to E.T. Like at that point,
Or they chase the female alien into the shed, and then they shoot like a firework at it, and it like smokes up the shed, and so then from then on you don't really see anything in it. It just felt to me watching it as it was like, oh, they're trying to disguise that they don't have the budget to do like a thing there.
Right, yeah. But they're trying to show you what's going on without actually showing you. Yep.
Yeah, and that's okay, but it felt very overt in that scene, whereas later on with the kind of the black shadowy aliens where they did similar things to try and disguise the lower budget, it really worked a lot better. And it just felt there was a bit of, I don't know, it just missed the mark a bit at the start there.
Sure. Well, I would say it's more, there are certain scenes where you can really see them spending the budget. I think that's how I sort of see it. So like while that beginning may seem like a little strange to obviously be cutting corners like that, I think that's because they're saving their money for like the ambulance scene. Was it the ambulance? Yeah, the ambulance.
It was like a police wagon,
vehicle, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Where that's obviously where they're pouring a lot of budget in there, because they have the aliens attacking that and they're flipping vehicles over and stuff like that. Or obviously later on when you have the monsters in force in the block itself. Like those are the scenes that really stand out to me as some of my favorite moments in the film, and I'm sure that's where they were really pouring the budget into.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of the drawback of having this movie that has a fair studio budget but not a large studio budget, is that they can't really go all out with that the whole way through. They have to pick and choose, which is a bit unfortunate. And because it was at the start, it kind of set a weird tone, which they then had to beat later on, which they did, but it's still kind of, yeah. Anyway, we've been going on this movie for a fair amount. I feel like I could talk about it for a long time just because it was the kind of movie that it's like, it's the kind of movie where you just really root for the heroes and they succeed in the end and everything kind of, I mean, it doesn't all work out great, obviously, but it's the kind of movie where you just are like so engaged in everything that's going on, and it's all so fun and endearing that you could just really like gush about it forever. But we should.
Well, actually, just now that you mentioned it, the ending, I actually kind of liked that it was sort of open-ended, but not in a normal way. So in like a normal movie like this would have left it open-ended in terms of like, another alien hatching at the end or something. This one just sort of left you wondering what was actually going to happen to the characters and the block itself and all that. It was interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't open-ended in the sense of what's happening with these aliens, because the aliens were the conflict and not the emotional factor. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to know what's happening with the characters, and so they left that a bit ambiguous so that you can kind of see multiple things happening there. And I think this is very unsubstantiated. I'm just going to say it. When I typed in Attack the Block into Google before, one of the autocomplete results was Attack the Block 2. I don't know if that's a real thing or not. All I know is that there was an autocomplete result for it, but I'd be interested to see that if it happens.
Hopefully that just means that everybody is looking for that.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about that earlier as far as like if they made a sequel to this film and how on board. Obviously I'd be on board with it because I love this one, but at the same time there would be a little bit of a reservation there simply because this movie does sort of wrap everything up, and even though there is a little bit left up to the viewers to kind of fill in the gaps at the end, the resolution is still strong enough, and this story is such a good point A to point B, wrap up that I don't know if a straight up sequel would be. You'd have to really kind of find a way to reintroduce either a new enemy or a new conflict of some sort, or to bring these back. It would seem like they'd have their work cut out for them as far as writing the film goes.
Yeah, you'd want to have an idea. You'd want to have an idea. You wouldn't just want to start with, we got to make a sequel and rehash it as much. I think, it'd be one of those. It's one of those films where the sequel would have to sort of stem from its own idea for it to work, like this film did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, if I was going to make a sequel to this movie, it's been 6 years since Attack the Block, right? And so John Boyega and all the other actors and whoever played the characters, they have grown out of the age where this can still be a coming-of-age story about those characters. And so I reckon it would have to almost certainly be either new characters or maybe focusing a bit on the two younger characters whose names I've forgotten, but they're like
Mayhem and Probs or something, right?
Props, yeah. Maybe those two are a bit older and they have to kind of come into their own thing with the same aliens. Or I don't know how I would do it, but I definitely wouldn't see it working as well with a 21-year-old John Boyega's character Moses. Because it's not.
I mean, I'd also be concerned that John Boyega's outgrown the movie's budget at this point.
That's true.
Well, after with Star Wars,
now he's got that Star Wars money now. He's
This only has one race of aliens. John Boyega doesn't appear in films with only one race of aliens. I guess we'll wrap it up by doing our ratings. I don't know. This movie it was just so fun. It's the kind of movie where I feel like there wouldn't be anybody who would not enjoy it, even though they wouldn't get as much out of it. It's just the kind of movie where this is enjoyable for all ages above, 15, because it is R-rated and some characters do die in it.
And I think the comparison's really there to sort of Hot Fuzz and World's End. Like we talked about that before. Yes. And so I think, I mean, if you or someone enjoys those films, this is definitely something I'd strongly recommend based on those films. But I mean, so I guess if we've got to give it numbers,
we do. That's how it works. Yep. That's how watching movies works. You always have to give them a number. Okay.
I'll go plug this straight into IMDb when I'm done. I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'll agree with you, Elliot. I reckon I'll go 8.5 out of 10. It was just fun, It's just a fun movie. Mm-hmm. Just watch it. It's fun. I don't know. That's all you need to say about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those films that I was just going to put a button on it and say this is one of those films that you would take out and show to anybody whenever you're wondering what to watch. Like, this has always been one that I'm like, well, I could watch this, or we could watch this, and if you can't really decide on something, well, we'll just put Attack the Block in because you're going to enjoy it.
It's a crowd pleaser, yeah. Anyway, Nick, thank you for joining us on Media MD.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for bringing such an awesome movie for us to watch. Now I have something to bust out when people are scrolling through Netflix trying to decide what we should watch.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you want for our listeners to find out more about you?
Yeah, well, I am a self-published science fiction author and also an independent game designer and podcaster, so I kind of have my hands in a lot of different pies. But you can read up all about all of those endeavors at nicholaskory.com. That's Kory, Kory.com. And the one that most people probably know me from is the Mythos Busters podcast, which is a podcast where me and a few friends talk about the Arkham Horror card game that Fantasy Flight just recently released. So
Yes.
check out those two things, I'd say.
Now, I have to say, we were looking at some of your books that you had published, and there's one about a girl who resurrects her husband's brain into the body of a dinosaur, like a few hundred years into the future. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Cybersaurus. That was my first self-published book.
That is definitely the one that I want to check out first. Anyway, yeah, thank you for joining us. Yeah, it was really good to have you on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be on, and I hope to, in the future, bring a new awesome movie or other thing to you guys to check out.
When Attack the Block 2 comes out, finally.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you for listening to another episode of Media MD. So if you want to get in contact with the show, we have an email address, which is mediamdpodcast@gmail.com, or you can also just check out our website, which is www.mediamdpodcast.com. And there's social links on there, and there's fun interactive games. I think I already used that joke. I'm sorry, Elliot. Yeah, I fucked up. Anyway, join us next fortnight when we'll be talking about two different shows in a double feature spectacular. We'll be talking about The 100 and iZombie. So tune in next fortnight for those.